You know more about QAnon than just about anyone, except perhaps the folks behind QAnon. You have identified what you believe are 27 QAnon-affiliated congressional candidates that are on the ballot this November. What do they have in common?
They are all believers in this idea that Democrats and the media and parts of the government are sort of all in cahoots to stop Donald Trump. And the reason why they want to stop Donald Trump is because they believe that Donald Trump is the only person out there that is working to break up a secret child sex trafficking ring that they think the media and Democrats are running.
So by identifying these congressional candidates, what is your call to action? Are you asking voters to not vote for them?
I mean, ideally, I think you should incorporate that in your decision when you vote for them. It's important to keep in mind here that the FBI determines that QAnon is a domestic terror threat, and for good reason. It has a track record of violence already. It's a cauldron of misinformation and deceit and false attacks against individuals. And lastly, and this is the part that doesn't get talked about a lot, but if you're a QAnon believer, part of the reason why you believe that Democrats and reporters are running child sex trafficking rings is because you think that they're either demons or psychic vampires. So I think that says a lot about, a potential elected official if they think that, most members of the media are actually secretly demons that are out there trying to wreak havoc on our world.
Now, President Trump has retweeted QAnon content on multiple occasions, but continues to claim he hasn't heard of them. What's your take on that?
I think it's the same thing that we saw back in 2016. In the lead up to the 2016 election, Trump repeatedly retweeted the white genocide hashtag and prominent members of the white genocide community, which is essentially a racist organization. It's an idea that's pretty racist. And then would sort of claim he didn't know anything about it, but constantly they interpreted it as a wink and a nod. And as a result of that, that community grew. And it wasn't that long after he was in office that we saw Charlottesville. And it's a similar pattern here, which is that most of the retweets of QAnon and promotion of QAnon from Trump have actually taken place since April. More than half of those over 250 have happened in the last few months. So it's obviously an intentional electoral strategy. The same things that those candidates saw in sort of becoming QAnon adherents in order to break through their primaries and win them. Is I think what you're seeing Donald Trump do at a national level. He understands that there's a lot of activity and energy here. And so far it's been proven to be true.
So are you worried about QAnon inciting violence on or after Election Day? And what are the clues you're seeing as to what activities or action they might be planning?
Yes, and I think that threat is reduced, certainly because of some actions by the social media platforms over the past few weeks. It would have been a lot better if they had taken this action 6 or 7 months ago when other companies like Apple and Roku and Google Play had taken them, but better late than never. So that certainly has reduced. But the thing that really concerns me is two things. One really is that they're well organized and they believe in violence. They keep talking about this thing called the storm, that the storm is coming. That's what they refer to it as. And it's this moment that they believe that after the election, Donald Trump is going to crack down on all of these members of the media and prominent Democrats who they think are running this sort of child sex cabal. And they will see any evidence, even a delay in the results, as a sign that the media and the deep state is trying to steal this election from Donald Trump. And as a result of that, they will sort of take up action. The second thing we've seen is that there have been over at least 1,000 instances, most of those taking place in former QAnon communities that have sort of camouflaged themselves for people to become poll watchers in order to help ensure that the votes are counted, as they say, correctly. That's not a good sign for us, because if you have people that are able to say, I was a poll watcher and I saw the local officials sort of tipping the scales against Donald Trump, that can foment and seed some of the chaos that is then likely to contribute to violence or the conditions that could lead to violence immediately after the election.
Now, what's your take on the action that Facebook has taken, Twitter has taken, Patreon, the podcasting platform has taken? Some critics have said if you ban QAnon on these platforms, they will just appear somewhere else, or you might actually energize them even more.
I think that those critics are right and wrong at the same time. It really depends on when you do it, right? There's another dimension to this, which is that if you do it before, it's like a cancer. If you take the cancer out before it has a chance to spread, it's extremely effective. Once it's spread, sometimes, what would work wouldn't actually be an effective treatment. So for example, the QAnon community had a 24% growth rate over the summer on Facebook. By contrast, news sites had a 0.6. Right-wing sites had about a 2.5% growth rate. Left-leaning sites had about a 1% growth rate. We know from Facebook's own internal reporting that 60 to 70% of all new signups or subscriptions to groups on Facebook come from Facebook's own recommendation. So the QAnon community had this moment of explosive growth over the summer, in large part due to these recommendations. So, if they had gotten rid of QAnon before then, it would have been a much smaller pool. It would have been much less politically relevant. There would have been much less people that believed in it and therefore likely to contribute to violence. I think that it's important to keep in mind that when Facebook limited their actions to only reducing violent QAnon groups, the ones that explicitly called for violence, an action that they took in August, that they deemed that to be an ineffective strategy. Something critics like myself were even saying back then is that you can't sort of do this half measure. It has to be all or nothing. What I would emphasize though, and so when they subsequently said we're going to ban the QAnon groups, all they did was eliminate the infrastructure of QAnon so that they can't scale or saturate and organize as well. But they didn't ban all of QAnon content. In fact, it's still a pretty big hotbed on Facebook. By contrast, TikTok said, no QAnon content at all. And just to put a number on that, in the past few months before they made that ban, QAnon content videos on TikTok had 488 million views in just a few months period. So yeah, it does have an effect when you deplatform. I mean, there's a reason why we don't talk about certain people that have been deplatformed, because if you lose that perch, you lose your power.
You think TikTok's strategy has actually worked? What did they do differently than Facebook?
What TikTok did that was really significant is that they banned the content itself, as opposed to just saying, we're not going to let you use QAnon hashtags anymore. So it's the equivalent. Facebook said, you can be as Q as you want. You just can't have a Facebook group called We Love Q. Well, that's ridiculous, because all that does is spread the QAnon people into parenting communities, into anti-vax communities. So essentially they're infecting other audiences. But TikTok said, no, we're not going to just ban the hashtags, no content. And they've done a pretty good job of trying to detect it. I think they deserve a lot of credit, especially because there's the new kid on the block here.
Now, if Trump does not get reelected, what happens to QAnon? Does it disappear? Does it disintegrate? Or no, is it too late because the phenomenon has already spread to Europe and beyond?
I think QAnon is here with us now. If the platforms had acted a year ago, there are always going to be conspiracy theories, and I don't think that we should try to get rid of all of them. There are some that are uniquely dangerous, and we don't want them to spread. QAnon was one of those theories. And to your question, we're going to have to accept this now as a part of our political reality. Whether or not Donald Trump wins, a few conditions remain. One is that there's only a candidate that's on the ballot in November that's a really vigorous QAnon adherent that's going to win her congressional race. And is going to be a member of Congress. And this is something that she talks about often and regularly. So that's one.
Who are you talking about?
Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia. She's a very big proponent for QAnon and is an evangelizer for the ideas behind it. So we're going to have this as a part of our politics into next cycle. And then beyond that, I mean, the cauldron of people that believe this isn't going to go away. In fact, they're going to see Donald Trump's defeat, if he loses, as evidence that the election was stolen from Trump, and it's only going to reinforce and calcify their positions. So I think for now, and to your point, it's spreading internationally, so it's here to stay. It may not be called QAnon in a year from now, but it'll be the same ideas.
As you say, there's a cauldron of people behind it. Do you have any idea who individuals that are actually behind it? The folks who started that initial rumor about Hillary Clinton 3 years ago? Would,
it's a mystery.
Tracking those people down give us any hope, to stifle the movement itself?
It's too late for that. I mean, I think that there were clearly a few storytellers, some of them on YouTube, that sort of helped. It's a very complicated and convoluted notion. I mean, at the center of all this is this idea that there's this secret person named Q that is dropping these clues. It's an activity as much as it's a conspiracy theory. And I think that's part of the reason why it has so much appeal to a very large number of people. But the source of it has never been made clear. The one person that consistently comes up, though, as a source of providing the key infrastructure is a guy by the name of Jim Watkins, who used to run 8chan before it was shut down by a bunch of web hosts, and now runs a website called 8kun. Without that platform, that's where Q distributes the clues. That is sort of like the ground zero for the QAnon conspiracy theory. And what we know about Jim is that he lives in the Philippines now. He moved out of the States, and he runs a pig farm there. And then also hosts this server for these conspiracy theorists and sells some cool Q pins and other paraphernalia. So he's selling some merch on the side. But that's it. That's the clearest person that we've had connected to all of this is that guy Jim.